The sky above Kahndaq did not belong to any single god. It was a bruise, purple and iron, spreading over a city that had learned how to make peace with the wrong sort of violence. Below, granite and glass, remembered empires and insurgencies in equal measure. The palaces of kings cast long shadows over markets where children traded scorpions for bread. Power lived here like a second skin. Ancient, stubborn, practical. It comforted some and ground others into dust. It was here, in this liminal place between myth and statecraft, that two storms chose to collide. Kratos arrived as he always did, like an argument that refused to end. His boots crushed sun-baked stone, his scars were a map of debts unpaid, and names still sticky in his mouth. Age had not softened him. The ash in his hair glittered with the ghosts of temples, and his hands remembered the weight of gods' necks. He had walked through the bones of Olympus and the ruin of realms, each step an unspoken promise. If power made monsters, then fury would be its surgeon. He carried no banner, only the blades and axes that sang with memory and the quiet, stubborn gravity of a man who had learned to answer gods with force, not supplication. Across the waterless gardens and beneath a colonnade of obsidian, Black Adam sat in a chair older than many nations. To call him a king simplified him. To call him a god angered him. He was both in the most inconvenient way, an ancient man modernized, a monarch whose justice was a hammer wrapped in lightning. Where Kratos bore his past as a wound, Adam bore his as an inheritance. He had been chosen and then exiled by the very deities who made him, and he had returned not for vengeance alone, but to take responsibility, to rule, to protect, to compel. These were his answers to chaos. He believed, bluntly and without theatrical apology, that the world could be ordered by a will unafraid to crush the small horrors that incubate when mercy softens into permissiveness. They met in the courtyard because conflict has a way of being courteous. It gives those who will die in it a line of sight. A wind that tasted of sand and blood lifted as Kratos stepped into the light. Black Adam rose, and the air answered. Lightning braided briefly through the columns, scenting the marble with ozone. They measured each other not with words at first, but with that ancient calculus. Hands, eyes, the tilt of shoulders that have known killing. Kratos spoke first, because silence had lately become another kind of violence. Gods and kings, he said, voice like scraping metal. Both leech, both claim we are less than they. I have found them to be liars. He did not aim for rhetoric, he aimed for truth. I have hunted gods who thought themselves shepherds. I will hunt any who would make men into sheep. Black Adam smiled without warmth. You honor the dead with violence, he said. You replace one tyrant with another and call it justice. Who stands to inherit the world you leave behind, Kratos? Wandering men and broken cities. You fight the gods, but your war is private. Mine is public. What followed was not a duel of fists so much as an unmasking. Two philosophies stripped themselves as easily as armor. Kratos, bone-deep skeptic of divinity, baptized in a hatred that had been forged into a tool, argued that power by its nature corrupted. Gods had been predatory, abstract in their cruelty, their decrees written without the consent of those under them. The way to break the cycle was to break the source. Kill the gods and the world would breathe. That breath might be ragged, but it would be free. That was Kratos' math. Remove the axis of divine compulsion, and the human scale would slowly return. Black Adam countered with a different ledger. He had seen empires collapse into famine and been forced, again and again, to choose between barbarism and order. He invoked Hobbes without needing the name. Life without a sovereign, he said, is brutish and short. In his world, gods had not only exploited, they had also shielded. They had given structure. He spoke as one who had borne the calculus. If 1,000 villages must bow to a hard man to survive, then the bow is a small thing compared to the continuation of children. Mercy in his frame was a currency that could bankrupt a nation. He had watched utopias rot into anarchy. He had seen the vacuum left by toppled tyrants, filled by worse animals. If Kratos' revolution cleared the table, who would place the new rules? Who would ensure the most vulnerable did not become prey? Their debate dug into deeper soil, questions that have always unsettled those who inherit power. Kratos framed freedom as elemental. The right to choose, even to ruin oneself, was worth the risk of occasional catastrophe. Black Adam positioned responsibility as inevitable. Some will seize power for gain. One might as well seize it for protection. Kratos invoked the dignity of the individual soul. Black Adam invoked the deterrent value of fear. Kratos' voice carried the cadence of a man who had been wronged by gods. His compassion was local and terrible. Black Adam's cadence was that of a ruler who had learned accountability through blood and iron. His compassion was cosmic and cold. Between them stood the old gods' shadows, remnants of judgment, rumor, and sacrament, leaning, listening. Neither argument offered a consolation prize. If Kratos was right and gods were monsters, then eradication was necessary. If Black Adam was right, eradication would be a pyre that burned cities for the sake of a dangerous purity. Both men had tracks stained with the same mud. Both had loved and lost, and believed their pain had taught them a truth, general enough to govern others. The conversation bent into particulars, the practicalities that would decide lives. Kratos asked bluntly, "When you take power, who answers for your abuses?" Black Adam answered bluntly in return, "I do. The law I enforce is my own conscience. I have no patience for councils that bicker while children starve." Kratos wanted a mechanism. Black Adam offered will. Kratos accused Will of being a tyrant. Black Adam accused Dithering of being a murderer. When they finally unclenched their words, because words can only attend a fight for so long, their faces had left impressions upon each other. There was a grudging respect. Kratos recognized method. Black Adam recognized consequence. Philosophy had prepared the field. The decision would not belong to argument but to action. The city, which had held its breath during the exchange, exhaled like the low nervous hum of distant thunder. The combat, when it came, would be more than two men breaking each other. It would be two answers to the problem of power trying to outlive their opponents. They began as two predators close enough to taste the other's intent. Kratos moved first, not with a feint but with the kind of measured violence that had felled gods. He launched the Leviathan Axe in a low arc, its blade spinning ice that shimmered against the heat of the courtyard. Black Adam met its trajectory with a blink. He was there and gone, a smear of black and gold, and then he struck the air where the axe had been. Tiny fractures in the stone singing where lightning met ice. The axe returned to Kratos' hand because Kratos had tossed it to make a rhythm. Rhythm in war is the same as breath. Black Adam came at him like consequence. His first blows were not meant to kill but to test. Lightning braided around his fists, turning fast muscle into a metronome of pounding judgment. He probed Kratos' guard, surprised with speed, and found gap. Kratos answered with weight. Shoulders that had crushed shields, wrists that had snapped spears. Where Adam moved like a thought, Kratos moved like a verdict, and their contact sounded like two worlds colliding. The city around them blurred. Courtiers fled behind pillars, and the saints' statues shook on their pedestals. Black Adam vaulted into the air and the sky took his name with a thunderclap. He struck from above, speed becoming a blade that cut the wind. Kratos met him with Spartan rage, unleashed muscles swelling, pain dissolving into a blind, glorious engine. When their fists met, shockwaves dented the courtyard. Marble exploded into showers of white and grit. Kratos' technique was battlefield gospel. Cripple, disarm. He looped the blades of chaos in a flaming serrated halo and drove Black Adam back, each swing a litany. Adam's own arsenal: flight, lightning, the speed to appear within a blink at another man's throat, met Kratos' relentless adaptation. He seared through Kratos' armor with bolts that tasted of old gods and new physics. Kratos bled, but his wounds were ledger entries, more than death sentences. He used the environment like a tool, tumbled a column to wedge and trip, traded a strike for a throw. He aimed not for the head but for the surrender that came from exhausted limbs. Black Adam's superiority in speed became more than an athletic fact. It was a strategy. He was everywhere Kratos was not. and fast enough to take advantage of any opening. He pushed Kratos, punished him for hesitation, and told him with every strike that there were limits to blasphemous endurance. Kratos answered with ferocity and cunning. He baited Adam into a narrow alley, where wings and flight were less effective, and struck a sequencing of blows that left Adam staggered. The Leviathan Axe bit into Adam's shoulder and the blades of chaos found a seam. The God King tasted iron and realized how rare it was to be cut. For a beat, the Blade of Olympus hummed in Kratos' grip, the very weapon that had once cleaved divine power like some blunt instrument of cosmic accounting. Kratos felt the possibility, a swing, clean and true, that might sever Adam's tether to his gods, might prune the branch without uprooting the tree. He raised the blade. For a heartbeat the world narrowed to two, the calculus of victory and preservation balanced as a coin. Black Adam did not panic. He is not a man without doctrine. He is a man who has embraced the darkness necessary to keep a country whole. He drew upon his lightning the way others draw upon breath. The storm answered, but there was another current, something older and holier to his name, an invocation that had been woven into him when gods first touched his heart. He did not call saviors, he called lawgivers, and the names that answered were not benevolent in the sentimental sense. They were custodians of order. They pushed against Kratos' blade with a pressure that was less personal power and more weight of covenant. The Blade of Olympus hissed and bit, but it met a ledger heavier than itself. Compensations, agreements, oaths made when the world was younger. The strike did not sever, it grazed. Kratos staggered. The Blade of Olympus rang hollow as if against the vault of heaven. He had come close enough to taste his old enemy, divinity, and found that the anatomy of Black Adam's power was not the brittle arrogance of Olympus, but a different geometry. Where Olympus ruled by caprice, the Egyptian endowment had been bound to the transaction of protection. Each lightning strike Black Adam unleashed was a sentence passed with precedent. Kratos' weapon could cleave a god's pride. It could not, without help, cleave a people's covenant, and that was the crucial difference. They traded more than blows. Kratos, in a moment of pure and terrible clarity, tried the only thing he had left that gods had feared, the weapon that had killed Zeus. He thrust, and this time the strike found purchase, in flesh and in the invisible seams of Adam's power. For a breath Adam faltered, lightning gutters dimming, his face a mask of surprise. Kratos, sensing the end, brought every ounce of wrath to finish. This would be the coup de grace that had felled a pantheon. The world held. Then the city answered. It was not the sound of shrieks. It was the aggregated need of thousands, pleas, prayers, curses, the small liturgies of people who had learned to live under an iron hand. Black Adam had through the years become a focus, a single point where complaints and safety were always lost. In that instant of weakness, that single human chorus swelled and wound itself into him like a rope. Teth Adam, touched by the volume of a people's reliance, found something he had kept hidden, his will not as a hunger for domination but as a reluctant steward. He let himself be pierced and used the pain to reconfigure his response. He took Kratos' blade between his hands and with an immensity of effort no mere mortal could sustain, he cracked the weapon across his knee. The Blade of Olympus shattered like an argument that had run out of premise. Kratos fell on one knee, face stung by ash and a sudden, unaccustomed doubt. He had planned for relics and rage. He had not planned for the quiet, boring power of responsibility, how it could plug into raw divinity and become something less theatrical and more immovable. Black Adam rose not as a victor drunk on triumph, but as one who had paid a price. His fist closed on Kratos' throat, and the lightning in his palm was not a show. It was judgment. He could have finished the Spartan many ways. He could have ended him cleanly, or left him broken to want. Instead, he did something worse and more honest. He delivered a defeat that would last, not for malice but for lesson. He struck Kratos with a lightning that burned like the summer of conquest. It did not simply stop blood. It seared away the weapons Kratos had used to make meaning. When Kratos slid to the ground, all that hung on his wrists were memories of names. Kratos tried to rise and the world testified to his effort in the tremble of marble. Black Adam stood over him, breath ragged, an embodiment of a terrible thesis. You would burn the table to expose truth. Black Adam said, voice low enough that the city's ears might not quite pass it. I will keep the table and keep the children fed. I will be cruel where necessary. I will be hated where necessary. I will carry the blame. That is how I govern. That is why I win. Kratos' reply came as a sound like a blade sliding from a scabbard. It was not an argument. It was the exhalation of a man who had lost more than a fight. You are a tyrant then, he rasped. And yet you carry the world. Black Adam's gaze was flat with the paradox he had chosen as his yoke. And you choose ruin in the name of purity, he said. Who speaks for those who die between your bursts of righteous fire? Who tends the grave? Kratos lay there, chest heaving, because his body could not be commanded by philosophy alone. He had been bested by a thing he had not fully accounted for. The social force of will tied to a people's survival. He had conceived the world as a set of tyrannies to be purged. He had underestimated that some tyrannies are chosen, or at least tolerated by the many who prefer order to the uncertainty of freedom. The last blows were not spectacular. Black Adam could have ended Kratos with one final bolt. Instead, he spared the man in a way that made the victory more absolute. He left Kratos alive to bear witness, alive to remember what had been argued and what had been lost. Kratos crawled away ragged, his hands empty, his creed intact but dented. Black Adam watched him go and felt briefly the hollow that is the price of stewardship. Black Adam's victory in the dust of Kahndaq is not merely the result of raw power. It is a resolution of competing moral geometries anchored by practical consequence. Physically, Adam's advantages, supersonic speed, lightning forged by the covenant of gods, flight and regenerative endurance, outpaced the tools Kratos had honed against Olympus. Strategically, Adam turned his speed and magic into leverage over environment and populace, denying Kratos the space and instrumentality needed for his god-killing strike. When Kratos summoned the Blade of Olympus, he exposed the fundamental difference between cutting a god and unweaving a social contract. Adam's power was not purely individual. It was the amalgam of a people's reliance and the gods' grudging assent. That made him a different kind of target, not a singular head to cut, but a living institution. Philosophically, the clash asked an old question: is moral rightness determined by purity of intent or by the outcomes power produces? Kratos represented the purity of revolt, a danger-scented insistence that the corrupt should be annihilated so virtue can flower. Black Adam represented ruthless consequentialism, a conviction that stability and survival can justify means that would embarrass idealists. The battle's practical aftermath favored the consequentialist in this case because the world Kratos envisioned freedom through eradication would in the short run produce catastrophic disruptions that would be fatal to the very people he sought to liberate. Crucially, Black Adam's win is not framed as an endorsement of tyranny as a moral good. The narrative leaves room for disgrace and regret. The final image is not triumphalism, but burden, a king who knows he will be loathed for choices he believes necessary. That moral complexity is what makes the victory philosophically defensible, rather than merely brute. Adam wins because he embodies a different calculus of responsibility, one that binds power to caretaking however harsh its measure. Kratos' failure is not only tactical, but conceptual. He misjudged the binding force of collective survival, and underestimated the practical moral claim of those who accept a hard hand in exchange for life. So Black Adam stands when the dust settles because his power is both individual and social, because speed and magic can outmatch steel and rage, and because he chose to shoulder the moral weight of a world that prefers icy order over chaotic liberty. Kratos walks away wounded but unbeaten in his spirit, his argument intact for those who value purity, but insufficient to overturn a reality that measures justice also by who lives and who dies. The final truth of the clash is grim and honest. In a world where survival is a public ledger, the man who is willing to bear the sins of governance often holds the last word. Black Adam spoke the final syllable, and the world, pragmatic, fearful, grateful in parts, listened.